The Mafia boss married the woman everyone laughed at. Then she took down his assassins by herself. Rosa Ferrano was the kind of woman people looked right past. She was 31 years old and lived in a quiet city in southern Italy. She walked with a slight limp from an accident she had as a child. She had a plain face, wore simple clothes, and spent her days working a desk job at the local government office. Nobody talked about her at dinner tables. Nobody thought to ask how she was doing. She just existed, somewhere in the background, like furniture that everyone had stopped noticing years ago. But the people who ignored her were making a very costly mistake. Rosa had something that most people in her world did not. She paid attention. Not in a nosy or dramatic way. Quietly. Constantly. Deeply. She noticed patterns in the way people moved. She saw things before they happened. She could walk into any room and know within 30 seconds who was nervous, who was lying, and where every exit was. She had been doing this since she was a young girl, not because anyone taught her, but because she had grown up in a world that never made her feel safe, and paying attention was the only way she knew how to protect herself. She had been left at the altar once, years earlier. The man had walked away without giving her much of a reason. After that, the people in her neighborhood treated her with the kind of pity that is somehow far worse than being ignored altogether. Her own mother, on her harder days, would look at her and sigh, and say that no man would ever want to build a real life with a woman like her. Rosa never argued with any of it. She just went to work, read her books, kept to herself, and kept watching the world with those quiet, steady eyes. Then, on an ordinary Thursday evening in October, everything changed. She was walking home from the market with a cloth bag of groceries when she heard something coming from the alley beside her building. Not loud sounds. That was exactly what made her stop. Loud sounds. People walk away from. Hushed, controlled sounds, coming from a dark alley at night. Those mean something is being done on purpose. She looked. 3 men had a 4th man pressed hard against the wall. They were not arguing. They were working. The 4th man was doing his best to stay on his feet, and he was losing. Even in the bad light, Rosa recognized him. Everyone in that city would have. His face had been in the newspapers many times. His name was Don Caruso, and he was the most feared man in the entire region for a very long stretch of years. Most people would have walked faster and pretended they had seen nothing. Rosa put her grocery bag down on the ground. She did not try to fight anyone directly. She knew her limits, and she respected them. What she did instead was think quickly and move smartly, before fear could catch up with her. She grabbed a wooden crate from the corner of the street, created a sharp noise and a disturbance, and screamed from a position that made her sound like she was calling down from an upper floor. Within moments, lights switched on all across the building face. The men in the alley made a fast decision. They could deal with a quiet alley. They could not deal with noise, lights, and witnesses. They ran. Don Caruso was left leaning against the wall, blood running down the side of his head. Rosa walked over to him, pulled a cloth from her grocery bag, and pressed it calmly against the cut. Her hands were not shaking. She was not trembling. She looked like someone who had simply done what needed to be done, and was now moving on to the next thing. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he asked her name. She told him. Then she said, in the same calm voice, that he should rotate his bodyguards more often, because men who follow the same pattern every single day eventually become predictable, and predictable people get hurt. He kept staring. Nobody spoke to Don Caruso like that. Nobody was that calm standing next to Don Caruso covered in blood. He did not forget her. 3 weeks later, he appeared at her workplace with flowers and a quiet request to speak with her privately. The reaction that followed spread through the city like fire through dry paper. People laughed, not quietly, not behind closed doors, openly. His associates assumed he had either lost his mind or was making some kind of elaborate joke. Women in the social circles around him said it was charity. Her own co-workers could barely keep the smirks off their faces. A gossip column in the local paper ran a small, cruel piece about the plain sparrow who had somehow caught the eye of a hawk. Even Rosa's mother told her not to embarrass herself when he eventually came to his senses and changed his mind. But Don Caruso had done something before he ever arrived with those flowers. He had quietly looked into Rosa Ferrano. He had asked careful questions, reviewed what he could, and tried to understand who she actually was. What came back surprised him. 3 separate times over the years, Someone had anonymously passed information about criminal activity in the neighborhood to the right people. Carefully enough that nobody had ever traced it back, he was now nearly certain that someone was Rosa. She had also, over many years, borrowed books on criminal law, lock systems, and emergency medicine from the local library, not for any course or qualification, just because she wanted to understand how those things worked. In his private opinion, she was the most situationally aware person he had come across outside of his own world. And in his world, that quality was rarer and more valuable than almost anything else. He proposed marriage. Not out of romance, at least not at the beginning. He proposed because he recognized clearly what she was, and he had spent enough of his life around people to know that what she had could not be trained into someone. Rosa said yes. She had her own reasons, and none of them were desperation. The wedding was small by any standard, 40 people, no spectacle, no display. Inside the marriage, Rosa did not change who she was. She did not attend any meetings. She did not ask questions about things that were not her concern. But she watched the household the way she had always watched every space she occupied. Carefully, with total attention, she noticed when delivery schedules shifted without explanation. She noticed which vehicles slowed down outside the gate a little too long. She noticed small things that most people would never think to link together. Don Caruso began asking her opinions in private. She would say something like, "The man who brings the wine has been parking further from the gate each week. Either he is nervous about something, or he is measuring distances." 3 days after she said it, they found a hidden listening device tucked beneath the stairs of the cellar. Their relationship, slowly, became something neither of them had expected. Not the soft, easy kind of closeness. The harder kind. The kind that grows between two people who see each other clearly and stop pretending otherwise. The world outside still laughed. To them, she was still the woman no one had ever understood him choosing. Then came February. Don Caruso had a trip planned. A meeting in a city 2 hours away, arranged months in advance, confirmed by too many people to cancel, without drawing the wrong kind of attention. He went. Rosa stayed at the villa, with 2 house staff, and a groundskeeper named Pietro, an older man who had looked after the property for 30 years. At just before midnight, Rosa woke up. No alarm had gone off. There was no obvious reason. She lay still in the dark, and listened. Then she heard it. Faint, but wrong. The gravel path along the east garden, the one she had specifically asked Pietro not to rake smooth, which he had found strange, and never questioned, gave a soft crunch. Once, then again, from a slightly different angle, then a third time, from further left. 3 people, moving in from different directions at the same time. She did not panic. Panic is what happens when you have not thought ahead. Rosa had been thinking ahead for 4 months. She sent 3 letters to Don Caruso's phone, a code they had once agreed on in conversation, half as a precaution, half because he never truly believed she would ever need to use it. Then she put the phone down and moved. She knew every corner of the villa the way she knew her own reflection. She knew where the light switches would create blinding reflections off the marble floors. She knew which room had a pantry door that could only be opened from the outside if you knew exactly where to press. A flaw she had identified months ago and deliberately never fixed. She knew the whole house like a map she had drawn herself, because in a quiet way she had. The first person she encountered in the interior corridor never saw her coming. She turned on 3 lights at once from the hallway panel. The reflection off the polished floor was blinding for just long enough. She used a technique she had practiced from a book on close protection methods. Not showy, not dramatic, just effective. He went down and stayed down. The second person found the pantry door standing open and stepped inside to check it. The door closed behind him. It took a long time to open from the outside, and Rosa had always known that. The third person was the one running the operation. She found him standing in the kitchen. He was trained. He had done work like this many times before. He looked at her, a woman with a slight limp, standing in a nightgown in a kitchen, and made the same decision that everyone in her life had always made. He underestimated her. What happened in that kitchen, Rosa never fully described. Pietro, who had watched parts of the night through a gap in the cellar door, with his rosary pressed tight in both hands, said he heard 2 short sounds, and then silence. When he finally came out, the man was secured to the radiator using the cord from the window blinds, and Rosa was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water, breathing slowly and steadily. She told the staff member standing in the doorway, still shaking, to bring the car around. Then she told her to call Don Caruso and let him know that his guests were waiting. He arrived before the sun came up. He walked through the villa slowly, room by room, without saying anything. He reviewed the camera footage. He sat with the reports. He was quiet for a long time. When he found Rosa, she had fallen asleep in the armchair in the library. A book was open across her lap. Her head was tilted slightly to one side. He stood in the doorway and did not wake her. He stood there for several minutes, and something settled inside him that had not been there before. He had not saved her the night in the alley. He had not offered her a better life. He had been bleeding on the ground, and she had helped him without hesitation, without fear, told him something true and useful, and walked away. He had gone after her. He had brought the flowers. He had been the one chasing, all along. The people who sent those 3 men had expected disorder. They expected a frightened household, an opportunity, an easy opening. What they received was 3 of their best people in custody, a message sent back to them through channels they recognized and respected, and a name attached to that message, Rosa Ferrano, connected to information that made it very clear she had been paying quiet attention to them for far longer than they had ever suspected. The press never got hold of the full story. What leaked out was small and vague. A few words about an incident at the Caruso estate. Nothing that made the front page. But in the circles where Don Caruso's name carried weight, the story moved the way those stories always move. Carefully, word by word, from one person to the next. They called her the Invisible One. She had been invisible her whole life. People had walked past her, laughed at her, pitied her, written her off, and never once stopped to consider what was actually going on behind those quiet eyes. It turned out that invisibility had been her greatest advantage the entire time. She had absolutely no intention of giving it up now.